If I'm wrong, the state of Alaska will lose some money for a few years, and then we can go right back to where we were. If he's wrong, the industry goes away, and we're in deep, deep trouble.
Senator, what do you say to that?
The industry is not going to leave the North Slope. The recent pipeline valuation studies done for the state and done for the court case involving the value of the pipeline showed us that BP is ready to keep investing on the North Slope for the next 50 years. The pipeline.
You're talking about the Judge Gleason ruling?
Yes.
That's not what that said.
Sure, it did. It said the pipeline. Their royalty statements.
It evaluated the pipeline for property tax assessment. There was no guarantee that BP is going to invest whatever it takes to keep that
BP
thing
is saying
going.
to its investors that it expects to be producing oil on the North Slope for 50 years. That's in the decision. It's black and white.
Wow.
And those are BP statements. Keep in mind, those are not the judges speaking.
BP says they're in for another half century. Why don't we just keep taxes high?
Well, but the fact is that BP is a business, and if they can't make money producing oil on the North Slope, they're not going to produce oil on the North Slope. It's as simple as that. You can't tell them, well, you said you were going to produce for the next 50 years, so even though you're losing $10 a barrel, you got to keep doing it. Who's going to tell them that?
Mr. French, where is the sweet spot? Do you think ACES needs to be adjusted at all?
We've passed a bill 17-3 out of the Senate this year. A very, very strong vote. There's only 20 senators, so when you get 17 of them to agree on something, you know you've got a pretty good idea. We passed a bill 17-3 to lower taxes on new fields and new production. I think that's where
new fields and those new exploration, does that equal production? Because we can have all this new exploration going down, but if that tax is still high, what's going to incentivize them to go through with the process?
Well, that's the idea. If you produce oil, we'll offer you lower taxes. And so the whole idea is to set up to incentivize new production in new fields. I think the industry folks who looked at it liked it. Armstrong, a new player in Alaska, liked it. Repsol liked it. Pioneer liked it. Brooks Range liked it. It was a major, major incentive
but did
for
the
small.
three major ones like it?
It didn't do much for existing.
Why wouldn't it apply to them?
Because they are producing most of their oil out of Prudhoe Bay, Kuparuk, Alpine, Endicott, and the other fields that are existing fields.
But if that's where the majority of our oil are coming from, why wouldn't we want to incentive taxes for those areas to keep production going?
You know what, I think that's what you'll see us work on this year, Elizabeth, is working on targeted tax breaks in exchange for more investment, set up in a way that doesn't let the money flow out of the state to other jurisdictions, that makes sure the money's plowed back into Alaska oil fields. I'm sure that's what you want, that's what I want, that's what Dan wants, and I'm sure that's what Bob wants, is more investment here in the state.
Here's the problem. Two problems. One, we've got the state legislature trying to tell a business how to run their business. And that, look at the state projects we had, the McKinsey Dairy, the grain, the whole
fish plant,
the whole thing. The state, just because you're elected to office doesn't make you smarter and doesn't make you a good business person. Second thing is the legacy fields. Well, we don't need to give them any tax breaks. Well, the fact is there's 5 billion barrels left in those fields. And if they can enhance the production on those 5 billion barrels, just 2%, that's 100 million barrels. Most of these little fields that we're talking about exploring for aren't even that big. You look at West Sac. West Sac has more oil in it than Prudhoe Bay, but it's too cold, it's gooey. You got to figure out how to get that oil out of the ground. It's going to take a lot of money and a lot of engineering to make that happen. How do we incentivize those guys to do that? Not by saying, well, it's a legacy field, we're not going to give them a break. We're only going to give breaks to these guys out here looking for little pockets of oil of 25 or 50 million barrels. Those are huge fields in the lower 48, but up here, not so much.
Our lieutenant governor said on this show recently, Senator French, that the problem that he has with ACES is that it takes the mother lode off the table. The Prudhoe and Kuparuk, it literally just shuts them down. And I'm of the opinion that it's almost as though ACES was designed with malice toward the big three. It's as though it was targeting these three companies out of resentment. And everybody else will give away the farm. As long as you're not a big three, whatever. We'll give you tax breaks through the wazoo. But if you're the big three, we're coming after you.
Well, except for it was the big three who brought the profits-based tax to Alaska and insisted on it in their gas pipeline.
Let's talk about ACES.
Well, but let's talk about what ACES is, which is a profits-based tax. And it's something that the industry insisted on as a part of their negotiations with Frank Murkowski back under the Stranded Gas Act for a pipeline. They brought that to us. Frankly,
So
most
you're saying the big three likes ACEs?
they like a profits-based tax.
And they like ACEs.
They don't exactly like the level where it's
So the
set.
big three likes ACEs?
I didn't say that.
Okay.
You keep saying that, but I didn't say that. What I said was that it was a type of taxation, a profits-based tax that the industry insisted on. And we made some adjustments to the levels, but a profits-based tax is very good for the industry. It helps them incentivize.
But to my point.
No, let me talk about West Sac for a second, because heavy oil is extremely important. It adjusts for the higher investment costs of heavy oil naturally, because you get to deduct every single dollar that you spend getting that heavy oil out of the ground. You deduct it before you pay a nickel of tax. The old ELF tax, the gross tax, extremely difficult to incentivize West Sac. So that's why you're seeing BP suddenly spending a lot of money on their CHOPS program to bring heavy oil out of the ground, because all those costs get deducted. Under ELF, that was not the case. They wanted a profits-based tax. They got a profits-based tax. They didn't get to exactly set the terms of that tax, because no reasonable legislator, no patriotic Alaskan legislator would let an oil company set the own terms of their tax. That's our job as people who are looking out for the long-term future of the state.
So as to my premise that ACEs unfairly targets the big three and gives away the farm to anyone who's not the big three, you would dispute that?
I would disagree.
Bob?
I wouldn't, and I think it's the tax incentive for new exploration versus legacy fields, and I mean, if you just look at it, that's what it says. And ACEs, I mean, you can quote all kinds of numbers on it, but the price of oil goes from $119 to $120. The marginal tax rate on that dollar is 92 cents. I mean, that's craziness. And if you look at some of the curves that oil companies look at in terms of risk versus reward curves and those sort of things, if you take off the top of the reward, which ACES does, then that whole curve drops down as far as no go on the project. And you just look through the numbers on it.
192% rate?
Marginal.
Marginal rate. I understand that, but that's the invested dollar.
Yeah, because
The
what
marginal
happens is that progressivity, when that goes up another half or 0.4%, that cascades all the way down to $1.
That just sounds like the Soviet Union to me. 92%.
Here we are in America, and these are American companies doing business here, and they're happily doing business. When you write your
I'm not
tax,
asking about that. I'm asking about the idea of a 92% tax rate.
When Conoco writes its tax check to Alaska each month, the way they're supposed to under ACES, they don't write a 92% check. They blend all of their expenses against all of their profits and write one check for a blended rate. And the blended rate is about 33%.
Well, if
That's the
Conoco
tax rate
made
they're paying.
$900 million and paid $1 billion in taxes, how's that a 32% tax rate? Sounds like a 100% tax rate to me.
Look, these are the numbers are the numbers, Dan. We get these numbers from the Parnell administration, and their blended rate is about a 32% tax rate.
But you would dispute they made $900 million, you paid $1 billion. Is that right? You pay more than you make? I mean, would you feel good if your salary, if you made $60,000, you had to pay $70,000 in taxes?
Conoco is making more money per barrel in Alaska than anywhere else in the world.
But to my point, is that right? That say to a business, an individual, anybody, you make $100,000, you got to pay $110,000 in taxes? Isn't there something fundamentally wrong with that?
They're doing very well, Dan. They're making a lot of money in Alaska.
You got to look at the fact that they invested a huge amount of money in Alaska, and they invested on the basis of $30 oil. Well, now it's $100 and whatever oil. So, hallelujah! They won the bet. If it had went down to $8 oil, like it did in the mid '80s, the oil companies were losing their tails big time. So they took a risk, and they won. And then the state of Alaska steps in and says, "Wow, you won, but we're going to take a bunch of your winnings away. You can't take the top end off."
I'm driving a big lazy car, rushing up the highway in the dark. I got one hand steady on the wheel, one hand's trembling over my heart.